I sort of start the story in 2014 with the Crimea annexation. This is way before the 2022, current scuffle. I mean, 1.0 was really before Brexit when you had this doctrine. It was originally called the Gerasimov Doctrine, and then its name changed to the hybrid warfare. And it was this, the national security state's involvement in internet censorship started with the events in Ukraine in 2014.
It all comes back to Ukraine.
It's amazing, right? It's like the Seinfeld, episode of the risk board. The risk board, is all depends on this, this giant landmass in the center, and it's you had this moment where Republicans were very aggressive about Russia. There's the famous Mitt Romney Obama sort of line after the events in Georgia in 2008, and a lot of Republican foreign policy interests were very concerned about Russia, and the allegation that Obama was soft on Russia, and Obama said, the 1980s called, they want their foreign policy back. But then it hit Ukraine, and that hit a lot of the Democrat economic interests around energy policy there, and so then they became super hawkish on the issue. But what you had was the events in 2014. With the two breakaway republics and then the Crimea referendum to join the Russian Federation were really the biggest foreign policy humiliation of the Obama era. And there was it was the culmination of many years worth of fears that Russia was going to reimpose effective political control over the Soviet satellites that had been absorbed into NATO since 1991. Interestingly, the same year that the internet was privatized, perhaps apropos nothing. But the point is, there was a need at the time, DOD, state, IC, that when the Crimea referendum happened, there was this perceived need to really have a robust media campaign to make sure that the hearts and minds of people in Central and Eastern Europe were just completely, veered towards the Euro-Atlantic side as opposed to the Russian side by any means necessary. And that really meant total and dominating control over media, and especially internet alternatives that were seen to be sort of burgeoning at the time. And, there was a lot of literature around the fact that, RT and Sputnik had penetrated Central and Eastern Europe, that the gas relationships between Russia and Germany were allowing this sort of blossoming of a sort of Russian media ecosystem. So this doctrine of hybrid warfare emerged to say that basically we need to look at warfare no longer as being about tanks, but being about tweets. In fact, NATO even created a doctrine called From Tanks to Tweets. And you can actually listen to Jens Stoltenberg's speeches on this from 2017 to 2019, where he declares this as the hybrid warfare doctrine. So from 2014 to 2016, you had this early internet censorship infrastructure that was set up in the Baltics, Sweden, Estonia, and in parts of Germany. You had these hybrid COE, centers of excellence, that NATO set up, where early content moderation controls were tested out. And when Brexit happened in June 2016, it was the culmination of the worst fears of the sort of hybrid warfare, advocates. This idea that you don't need to defeat a standing army if you can just change the political leader. Then that's effectively like taking over the country, right? So that was what they were arguing Russia was doing when Brexit happened. We're familiar with Russiagate here in the U.S., but there was a equally influential campaign to portray Brexit as being a sort of Russian operation as well. And only 1 month after Brexit, in July 2016 at the Warsaw Conference, NATO effectively amended its charter to engage in, really for the first time, they at least formally, I should say, to be engaged in political warfare. They added this hybrid warfare element to the charter under the Warsaw Conference the month after Brexit, under the sort of perception that everything they feared was happening in Central and Eastern Europe had now moved, all the way westward to Brexit. And then when 5 months later Trump won the U.S. election, all the stops are pulled out.
Yeah.
And you had this merger between the highest levels of the transatlantic national security state, U.S., U.K., NATO, and opportunistic political operatives, both from the Democrat Party and from the sort of legacy foreign policy establishment of the Republican Party, all forming as a sort of senior thought leadership cell around this brand new emerging field of domestic speech-related content moderation. And what you find is when you trace your way up to every little NGO, every little, private pop-up censorship firm, every little university, that we can talk about who has a role in this, you trace your way up to the funding and to the thought leadership and to the sinecures that they all hold at these transatlantic institutions. It will come back to that same group every single time. And, we can talk about specific examples, but you really had this 1.0 from 2014 to 2016. But then 2017, you had this sort of trial and error period from about January to November, where they were trying analog, censorship. YouTube hired 10,000 more content moderators in early 2017. They tried to just throw more bodies at the problem, and we're finding that they had the quote whack-a-mole problem. The censors could not keep up with the pace, speed, and evolution of memes, of just kids on the internet. That was really when the AI censorship superweapons entered the picture and totally changed things in 2018. It started with what I call the transit. By the way, feel free to interject in any of this. It started with what I call the transatlantic flank attack, which is basically you had these sort of Hillary Clinton and Obama sort of State Department folks who had all been tasked with coercing Europe to pass sanctions on Russia after Crimea. They did a similar roadshow on disinformation in 2017, except instead of lobbying for sanctions, they were lobbying for censorship. This culminated in the passage in August 2017 of a bill in Germany called NetzDG, which basically put a $50 million fine on social media companies if they didn't take down basically misinformation or certain kinds of hate speech or abuse against journalists online. All this stuff. The devil is in the details with how they defined it basically to mean populist language. At the time, Germany was the foreign policy establishment was very concerned about a rising upstart right-wing populist party in Germany called Alternative for Deutschland, AfD. And so they basically passed NetzDG as a way to take out AfD from the political equation and fine social media companies $50 million for allowing that content to be on there. And it spilled over into the European Union. And it required compliance with NetzDG required AI, because you couldn't respond to a takedown request, in 24 to 48 hours. You didn't have time to assess it. But if you implemented best practices, you qualified for a buffer. Basically, there was this adoption of these domestic censorship superweapons at the technological level, at the AI level, starting in late 2017, early 2018, that really is sort of censorship 2.0 after the initial analog. And that basically, we've been in a sort of iterative, progressive, quantitative improvement of those censorship mechanisms. I would say from 2018 up until 2022. I do think that there is that a different era happened after the Musk acquisition, because there was a piercing of the totalizing phalanx. Every single tech company passed the same restrictions on what you could say about COVID, passed the same restrictions on what you could say about mail-in ballots. Every single one of the majors now has a climate misinformation policy. You get demonetized if you talk, you get banned if you talk about this, you get demonetized if you talk about that. And when Musk acquired Twitter, a number of things happened contemporaneously, including a changeover at the House at the political level. I think we are in a sort of censorship 3.0 era right now, where a lot of the brazenness of the 2.0 era is being justified rather than openly promoted. is being negotiated rather than being accepted at face value. And there's a unique moment of opportunity for people who believe in freedom on the internet to use this as a moment to fight back.